Aaliyah Cooper thought she was saving a forgotten soul with a peanut butter sandwich and a thermos of coffee. She didn't know the man on the cardboard was a walking shadow of the Pentagon's deepest secrets. But when 3 high-ranking military officers appeared at her doorstep in full dress uniforms, she realized the homeless man wasn't just a veteran. He was a debt the government was finally coming to collect. The city of Philadelphia in late March is a predator. It bites at the fingers and numbs the soul, especially at 6:15 a.m. when the streetlights are still humming their dying yellow song. For Aaliyah Cooper, the morning wasn't a beginning. It was a continuation of a struggle that never seemed to end. She stood in her studio apartment, 300 square feet of cracked walls and whistling pipes. Her life was a delicate stack of cards. One job at the hospital cafeteria, another stocking shelves at a grocery store until midnight, and nursing classes sandwiched in between. She was 22, black, and living on the razor's edge of an eviction notice that had been taped to her door like a death warrant. Yet as the coffee pot hissed, she performed her sacred ritual. She spread peanut butter onto 2 slices of bread, the last of the loaf. One for her, one for Jack Ghost Sterling. Most people walked past the bus stop outside the closed-down laundromat on 47th Street with their heads down, eyes fixed on their phones to avoid seeing the human wreckage on the sidewalk. Aaliyah had been one of them for 2 weeks, telling herself she was too broke to care. But then she saw his eyes. Jack wasn't just 68 and homeless. He was a man with a gaze that felt like it could see through steel. When she finally offered him that first sandwich, he didn't grab for it. He looked at her with a terrifyingly calm dignity. "You're working 2 shifts, Miss Aaliyah," he had said that morning, his voice a low, resonant baritone that didn't belong in the gutter. "You need this fuel more than I do." "I'm young," she'd replied, forcing a smile. "I've got plenty of fire left, you take it." Since then, it was their clockwork. 6:15 a.m. sharp. Aaliyah would sit on the edge of the bus bench, and Jack would sit on his flattened cardboard, wrapped in a mildewed wool blanket. For 10 minutes, the world wasn't a place of bills and exhaustion. It was a theater of the impossible. Jack told stories. He didn't talk about the weather or the local sports scores. He talked about flying stealth birds into the Balkans. He talked about extracting senators from places that didn't exist on any map. "I worked for a 3-letter agency once, Aaliyah," he'd say, staring at the gray horizon. "The kind where they don't give you medals, they just give you a new name and a reason to disappear." Aaliyah would listen, nodding as she sipped her coffee. To her, these were the hallucinations of a broken mind, a way for an old man to survive the shame of sleeping on a trash bag. She didn't correct him. She just gave him the one thing no one else would, her time. But the city is a cruel witness. One morning in April, a man in a $1,000 suit, a man who likely never knew the feeling of an empty stomach, walked past and deliberately kicked Jack's blanket into the wet gutter. Jack didn't yell. He just watched the dirty water soak into the wool with a look of profound, silent sadness. Aaliyah's fire ignited. "Hey!" she screamed, spinning the businessman around. "What is wrong with you? That's someone's grandfather." The man didn't even look back, muttering about sidewalk trash as he hurried to his high-rise office. Aaliyah knelt in the grime, helping Jack wring out the heavy, stinking blanket. Her hands shook with a rage she couldn't contain. "You didn't have to do that, Miss Aaliyah," Jack said softly, his eyes searching hers. "Yes, I did," she snapped, her voice thick with unshed tears. Jack smiled then, a sad, knowing smile that chilled her to the bone. "You've got a fight in you. That's good." He folded the damp blanket across his lap like a king's robe. "You're going to need it. The world doesn't like it when the forgotten start to be remembered." At the time, she thought he was just being poetic. She didn't see the black sedan parked a block away, its tinted windows reflecting the rising sun. She didn't see the man in the passenger seat lowering a pair of long-range binoculars. Aaliyah went to her shift at the hospital, her heart heavy with the math of survival. She had $90 left for the next 2 weeks. The electric company was threatening a blackout. Her stomach was a hollow cavern, but she'd made sure Jack had his banana and his protein. She was a girl who had nothing, giving everything to a man who claimed to have been a ghost. 7 days later, the ghost disappeared. Aaliyah arrived at 6:15 a.m. with the usual brown paper bag. The bus stop was empty. The cardboard was gone. The trash bag of his meager belongings gone. Even the damp spot on the concrete had dried up, as if Jack Sterling had never existed at all. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She waded through 3 buses, her breath hitching every time a door opened. He wasn't there. For a week, she searched. She walked to the Mercy Street shelter, her feet aching in her worn-out shoes. She pleaded with intake nurses at the county hospital. "George Fletcher, Jack Sterling," she asked. "Honey, people like that don't leave a trail," the shelter worker told her with a pitying look. "They just move on, or they go out like a candle in the wind." Aaliyah refused to believe it. On the 7th day, she left a note and a sandwich on the empty sidewalk. "Hope you're okay. A." When she returned that evening, a figure was sitting there. It was Jack, but he looked like a skeleton draped in rags. He was thinner, his face drawn and gray, but it was his hand that stopped Aaliyah's breath. Across the back of his right hand was a fresh, clean surgical scar, too precise to be a street injury. "Jack, where were you?" she cried, crouching beside him. "Had a spell," he rasped, his voice sounding like dry leaves on pavement. "I'm all right now, I'm upright." "You're not all right," she whispered, looking at the scar. Jack pulled his sleeve down quickly, a flash of the old soldier returning to his eyes. "Listen to me, Aaliyah. I don't have much time left. The system, it found me." He reached into his tattered jacket and pulled out a heavy, sealed white envelope. It was addressed in a shaky, elegant script to a name that meant nothing to her. General Victoria Ashford, the Pentagon. "If something happens to me," Jack said, his grip on her wrist surprisingly strong, "you mail this. Promise me, girl, don't look at the return address, just mail it." Aaliyah took the envelope, the weight of it feeling like lead in her hands. "I promise, Jack." He leaned back against the cold brick wall and closed his eyes. "Good girl. You've got that fight. You're going to need it when the uniforms show up." Aaliyah tucked the letter into her bag, never imagining that in less than 48 hours, her tiny apartment would be surrounded by men in dress blues. And the ghost she fed every morning would become the most famous name in Washington, D.C. Aaliyah Cooper thought she knew the man she was feeding, but when Jack Ghost Sterling collapsed at her feet, the veil of his secret life finally tore open. As she fought to save him in a hospital that wanted to throw him away like trash, a single computer search triggered an alarm at the Pentagon, and suddenly, the girl who just wanted to help became the most important witness in a high-stakes military cover-up. The morning air was thick with the scent of rain and exhaust. Aaliyah stood at the bus stop, the familiar weight of the thermos in her hand. She was exhausted, her eyes burning from a double shift, her mind a frantic loop of unpaid bills and nursing exams. But when she saw Jack, her heart skipped. He wasn't just tired, he was gray. His hands, usually so steady, were vibrating with a violent tremor. "Jack, take the coffee," she whispered, reaching out. As his fingers brushed the metal, the world seemed to tilt. The thermos clattered onto the concrete, spilling the dark liquid like an ink blot across the sidewalk. Jack didn't reach for it. His eyes rolled back, his body folding like a discarded map, knees buckling under the weight of a life lived in the shadows. "Jack!" Aaliyah screamed. catching him before his head hit the unforgiving pavement. She looked around, her voice desperate. "Somebody call 911. A jogger slowed down, looked at the homeless man, and kept running. People getting off the bus stared as if they were watching a movie they didn't want to see. In that moment, Aaliyah realized that to the world, Jack was already dead, a ghost they had been walking through for years. The ambulance arrived 7 minutes later, but to Aaliyah, it felt like 7 hours. When the paramedics tried to push her back, asking if she was family, she didn't blink. "I'm all he's got," she said, her voice hard as iron. At St. Vincent's Hospital, the reality of the American dream hit her like a physical blow. She sat in a waiting room that smelled of floor wax and despair, still clutching Jack's empty thermos. She texted her supervisor, Mrs. Carter, telling her she couldn't make her shift. "You okay?" Mrs. Carter replied. "Jack collapsed. I'm at the hospital. I'll cover you, keep me posted." 2 hours later, a nurse named Rachel called her name. Rachel didn't look like a healer. She looked like an accountant for the dying. "He's stable. Dehydration, possible stroke," Rachel said, her eyes fixed on a computer screen. "But we have a problem. No insurance, no ID, no emergency contact. We're transferring him to County General." Aaliyah's stomach dropped. She knew what County General was, a warehouse for the forgotten where the wait times were measured in days and the hope was measured in milligrams. "He's a veteran," Aaliyah said, her voice rising in the sterile hallway. "Check the VA system. He told me stories. Missions, helicopters. He served this country." Rachel sighed, the sound of a woman who had heard 1,000 lies. "Do you have proof? Discharge papers? A VA card?" "I'm his niece," Aaliyah lied, her heart hammering against her ribs. "He's been on the street. He doesn't carry papers in his pocket. Just run the check, please." A doctor in a white coat, Dr. Patel, stepped out from behind the desk. He looked at Aaliyah's exhausted uniform, then at the annoyance on Rachel's face. "Run it, Rachel, as a courtesy." The silence that followed was deafening. The only sound was the rhythmic click-clack of the keyboard. Rachel's eyes scanned the screen, then her hands stopped moving. Her jaw tightened. She leaned in closer, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in her glasses. "What is it?" Dr. Patel asked, moving to stand behind her. "Jack Allen Sterling, born 1957. Honorable discharge 2001, Rachel whispered. She scrolled down, her face turning pale. "The service record. It's heavily redacted. Almost everything is blacked out." Dr. Patel's expression shifted from professional curiosity to genuine shock. "Redacted? That means his service was classified. Black Ops." He turned to Aaliyah, his voice now hushed, as if they were being watched. "What exactly did your uncle do in the military?" Aaliyah's throat felt like it was filled with sand. "I don't know," she whispered. "He said he flew people who didn't exist to places that weren't on maps. I didn't believe him." Dr. Patel straightened his coat. "Transfer him to Ward C. I'll handle the VA billing authorization myself." "Are you sure?" Rachel asked. "If the VA disputes this." "They won't," Patel interrupted. "Not with a file that looks like this. This man isn't just a veteran. He's a ghost the government lost." Aaliyah was finally allowed into his room an hour later. Jack looked fragile, swallowed by the white hospital sheets, a forest of tubes and wires connecting him to a life he seemed ready to leave. His eyes opened, focusing on her face with a clarity that broke her heart. "You didn't have to," he murmured, his voice a ghost of its former self. "Yeah, I did," she replied, pulling her chair close. He reached for her hand, his grip weak but steady. "You've got that fight. Good." As the sun began to set over the city, casting long, jagged shadows into the hospital room, Aaliyah felt the weight of the envelope in her bag. the letter addressed to a general at the Pentagon. She looked at Jack, snoring softly under the hum of the monitors, and for the first time, she wasn't just a girl trying to pay rent. She was a guardian. She didn't know that the moment Rachel had entered Jack's name into the system, a red flag notification had been sent across encrypted servers. Deep within the Pentagon, an officer's screen flashed with a name they hadn't seen in 15 years. The ghost had been found, and they were coming to see who had been feeding him. Aaliyah thought the hospital was a safe haven for Jack, but she didn't realize that his name was a tripwire. When she found a leather-bound notebook hidden in his rags, she uncovered coordinates that led to the world's most dangerous secrets. Now, the hospital hallways are no longer empty. They are filled with men in suits who don't have name tags, and Aaliyah is the only thing standing between them and the man they want to make disappear forever. The fluorescent lights of St. Vincent's Hospital hummed with a low, clinical anxiety. Aaliyah sat by Jack's bed, her nursing textbook open on her lap, but the words were blurring into gray lines. Her mind was anchored to the man in the bed. Jack Ghost Sterling looked smaller under the harsh white lights, his breathing supported by the rhythmic hiss of a ventilator. She looked at the plastic bag of personal effects the nurse had handed her. It was pathetic, a pair of frayed socks, a rusted pocket knife, and a small, weathered leather notebook. Aaliyah reached into the bag and pulled out the notebook. The leather was cracked, smelling of rain and old tobacco. She hesitated. This was his privacy, his only remaining piece of dignity. But as she saw a black SUV with government plates pull into the hospital parking lot 4 floors below, a cold instinct told her that privacy was a luxury they no longer had. She opened the first page. There were no poems, no diary entries about the cold or the hunger. Instead, there were rows of dates and coordinates. Latitude, longitude. Next to them were acronyms that made no sense. APECO, Fallen Tower. Black Hawk 7. As she flipped toward the back, the handwriting changed. It became frantic, jagged. They think I'm dead. It's better that way. If they find me, they find the logs. If they find the logs, the truth about the 1998 extraction comes out. God forgive us for what we left behind. Aaliyah's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. This wasn't the rambling of a broken mind. This was a ledger, a record of things that were never supposed to be written down. A shadow fell across the room's doorway. Aaliyah snapped the notebook shut and shoved it into her bag just as the door pushed open. It wasn't Dr. Patel. 2 men entered. They wore charcoal suits that cost more than Aaliyah made in a year. Their faces were as expressive as stone walls. One was tall, with a military buzz cut and a scar that bisected his left eyebrow. The other was younger, wearing wire-rimmed glasses that caught the light, hiding his eyes. "Miss Cooper," the tall one said. His voice was a flat, rehearsed monotone. "I'm Aaliyah. Who are you? Visiting hours ended an hour ago." "We're with the Department of Veterans Affairs, Office of Special Investigations," the man said, though he didn't offer a badge. "I'm Agent Miller. This is Agent Vance. We're here to facilitate Mr. Sterling's transfer to a private facility in Maryland." Aaliyah stood up, her legs shaking but her voice steady. "Dr. Patel said he wasn't stable enough for transfer. He's on a ventilator. The facility in Maryland has the best neurotrauma specialists in the country," Vance, the younger one, said with a thin, unsettling smile. "Much better than what he'll get here. We've already cleared it with the hospital administration." "I'm his proxy," Aaliyah lied again, her voice hardening. "You don't move him without my signature." Miller stepped closer. He was large enough to block out the light from the hallway. "Miss Cooper, we know you aren't his niece. We know you're a nursing student who lives at 1422 West Gerard. We know you've been bringing him breakfast for 6 months." He paused, his eyes scanning the room, landing on her bag. We also know he was carrying some personal items that are technically government property. The air in the room turned cold. Aaliyah felt a bead of sweat trickle down her spine. They didn't care about Jack's health. They wanted the notebook. They wanted the letter. They wanted the ghost to stay a ghost. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her hand tightening on the strap of her bag. "He has a blanket and some old clothes, that's it." Miller's eyes narrowed. He looked at the heart monitor, watching the steady electronic pulse of Jack's life. "He served his country, Aaliyah. He was a hero. But heroes sometimes hold onto things they shouldn't. It's for his protection and yours that those items are returned." "Get out," Aaliyah said, the fire Jack had seen in her finally erupting. "Get out before I call hospital security and the local news. I'm a nurse in training and I know my rights. You have no warrant and you have no medical authority here." Vance leaned in, his voice a low hiss. "You're playing a game you don't understand, Miss Cooper. People who help Jack Sterling tend to disappear from the record just like he did." "Then I guess I'm in good company," she retorted. The two men exchanged a look. Miller checked his watch. "We'll be back at 0800 tomorrow with the proper paperwork, Aaliyah. I suggest you spend the night thinking about your future. You have a lot of potential. It would be a shame if your nursing license was denied because of character concerns." They turned and walked out, their footsteps echoing with a terrifying precision. Aaliyah collapsed back into her chair, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked at Jack. His eyes were closed, his face peaceful, unaware that his presence had just turned her life into a target. She knew she couldn't stay here, and she knew she couldn't leave him. She pulled out her phone and searched for the name on the envelope, General Victoria Ashford. The search results made her blood run cold. Ashford wasn't just a general. She was the director of intelligence at the Pentagon, a woman known as the Iron Lady of Arlington. She was also the widow of Colonel Marcus Ashford, a pilot who had gone missing in action in 1998, the same year mentioned in Jack's notebook. Aaliyah looked at the notebook, then at the letter. She realized then that Jack hadn't been homeless because he was broken. He had been hiding. He had been protecting the truth for 25 years, waiting for someone he could trust. Someone who saw him as a human being instead of a secret. "I've got the fight, Jack," she whispered, leaning over the bed. "I've got the fight." She reached into her bag, took out her phone, and did something that would change everything. She didn't call the police. She didn't call the VA. She called the one person she knew who wasn't afraid of the dark. Her old professor, Dr. Marcus Thorne, a man who had spent his life fighting for veteran rights and had a reputation for being the biggest thorn in the Pentagon's side. "Professor," she said when he answered, "it's Aaliyah Cooper. I have a patient, but I think I actually have a revolution." As she spoke, she didn't notice the small, black device the agents had planted under the visitor's chair. Every word she said was being transmitted directly to a command center 5 miles away. The clock was ticking. In 12 hours, the uniforms would arrive. And Aaliyah Cooper was about to find out exactly how much a peanut butter sandwich was worth to the United States government. The Pentagon thought they could wait until morning to erase Jack Sterling, but they didn't count on Aaliyah Cooper's defiance. Under the cover of a citywide thunderstorm, Aaliyah and a rogue veterans advocate turned a hospital room into a battlefield. They weren't just moving a patient. They were stealing a living secret from under the nose of the most powerful military on Earth, and the first gunshot hadn't even been fired yet. The rain lashed against the windows of St. Vincent's like 1,000 tiny hammers trying to break in. Inside room 412, the air was thick with the scent of ozone and antiseptic. Aaliyah stood by the door, her eyes darting to the black-and-white security monitor at the nurse's station. She had 3 hours. 3 hours before Agent Miller and his cleanup crew returned to turn Jack into a footnote in a classified file. The door opened softly. It wasn't a nurse. It was Dr. Marcus Thorne. He didn't look like a professor tonight. He wore a grease-stained raincoat and carried a heavy medical bag. His face, etched with the scars of his own time in the Middle East, was a mask of grim determination. "Aaliyah," he whispered, his voice like sandpaper. "You're sure about this? Once we walk him out that door, there's no coming back. They'll flag your name. They'll freeze your accounts. They'll make you a ghost right alongside him." Aaliyah looked at Jack, who was pale and fragile under the white sheets. She thought about the 6 months of peanut butter sandwiches. She thought about the way he'd said, "The view from down here is a lot more honest." "He's been a ghost for 25 years, Professor," Aaliyah said, her voice dropping to a low, resonant vibrato. "It's time he stood in the light. If I lose my license to save a man who saved the world, then maybe I wasn't meant to be a nurse. I was meant to be a witness." Thorne nodded, a flicker of respect in his tired eyes. "Then let's move. We have a window. The shift change is at midnight. The suits are downstairs in the lobby, but they're watching the main elevators. They don't know about the service lift behind the laundry." The next 20 minutes were a blur of high-stakes precision. Aaliyah, using her hospital ID, bypassed the alarm on the ventilator. She switched Jack to a portable oxygen tank, her fingers moving with a grace she didn't know she possessed. Every beep of the monitor felt like a siren. Every rustle of the sheets sounded like a shout. "He's stable," she whispered, her heart drumming a frantic rhythm. "But the portable tank only has 40 minutes of air." "That's more than enough to get to the safe house," Thorne replied. They began to wheel the gurney toward the back exit. The hallway was a tunnel of shadows. As they passed the nurse's station, the night nurse, Sarah, looked up. Aaliyah froze. "Transfer to radiology?" Sarah asked, her voice bored, eyes half closed from her 12-hour shift. "Yeah," Aaliyah said, her voice steady. "Dr. Patel ordered a fresh CT scan. The VA wants it before the morning transfer." Sarah waved them through without a second thought. That was the thing about being invisible. People only saw the uniform, never the person wearing it. Aaliyah had learned that from Jack. They reached the service lift. The heavy metal doors groaned open. They pushed the gurney inside, the smell of industrial detergent filling the small space. As the elevator descended, Aaliyah checked her phone. A notification flashed. Urgent. Security alert. Unauthorized access to patient file. Sterling J. "They know," she breathed. "They're in the system." "Then we stop playing nice," Thorne said. He reached into his bag and didn't pull out a stethoscope. He pulled out a localized signal jammer. He flipped the switch, and the red light on the elevator's security camera flickered and died. The elevator hit the basement with a heavy thud. The doors opened to the loading dock. The rain was a curtain of silver. Thorne's old, dented cargo van was backed up to the bay. "Get him in, now." They slid the gurney into the back of the van, securing it with ratchet straps. Aaliyah jumped in beside Jack, holding the oxygen mask to his face. "Aaliyah," Thorne yelled from the driver's seat. "Look." 2 black SUVs had just roared around the corner of the hospital, their headlights cutting through the rain like the eyes of a predator. They weren't waiting until 8:00 a.m. The alarm had tripped, and the wolves were out. "Hang on, Jack," Aaliyah whispered, her hand trembling as she gripped his. "The fight's just starting." Thorne slammed the van into gear. The tires shrieked against the wet pavement as he fishtailed out of the loading dock, narrowly missing the lead SUV. Aaliyah saw Agent Miller in the passenger seat of the chase vehicle. His face was no longer a stone wall. It was a mask of pure, lethal fury. The chase through the streets of Philadelphia was a nightmare of neon and thunder. Thorne drove like a man possessed, weaving through narrow alleys and blowing through red lights. Behind them, the black SUVs stayed glued to their tail, silent and relentless. No sirens, no lights. This wasn't a police chase, it was an extraction. "They're going to ram us," Aaliyah shouted over the roar of the engine. "Not in this neighborhood," Thorne yelled back. "Too many witnesses, they need to keep this quiet." Suddenly, Thorne cut the wheel hard to the right, diving into an underground parking garage of a half-finished construction site. He killed the lights and drifted into a dark corner behind a stack of steel girders. They sat in the suffocating silence, the only sound the hiss of the portable oxygen and the rain drumming on the concrete above. Aaliyah watched the entrance. 10 seconds passed. 20. The two black SUVs sped past the garage entrance, their tires throwing up fans of dirty water. They thought the van had kept going toward the highway. Aaliyah let out a breath she felt she'd been holding since 6:15 that morning. She looked down at Jack. His eyes were open. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the ceiling of the van, a strange, distant smile on his face. "Jack, can you hear me?" He moved his hand, weakly pointing toward her bag. Aaliyah reached in and pulled out the leather notebook. She opened it to the very last page, a page she hadn't seen before. There, written in a different hand, was a phone number and a single word: Nightbird. "Who is Nightbird, Jack?" His voice was a dry rattle, barely audible. "The only one. They're afraid of. Call her, tell her. The ghost is cold. It's time to come in." Aaliyah looked at the number. She knew what she had to do. But as she reached for her phone, a red laser dot appeared on the back of Thorne's head, visible through the rear-view mirror. A third SUV had stayed behind, and the man stepping out of it wasn't Agent Miller. He was wearing the dress blues of a United States colonel. "Miss Cooper," a voice boomed through a megaphone, echoing in the hollow garage. "Step out of the vehicle. You are currently in possession of a high-value national security asset. This is your only warning." Aaliyah looked at the notebook, then at the dying man who had trusted her with his life. She didn't step out. She dialed the number. "Hello," a woman's voice answered on the first ring. It was a voice of pure command, the voice of General Victoria Ashford. "General," Aaliyah said, her voice cracking but firm. "I'm sitting in a van with Jack Sterling, and your men are about to kill us. Do you want the notebook or do you want the truth?" There was a long, terrifying silence on the other end of the line. "Who is this?" the general asked. "I'm the girl who brought him breakfast," Aaliyah replied. "And I'm the one who's going to tell the world what you did in 1998 if you don't call off your dogs right now." General Victoria Ashford hadn't heard the name Jack Sterling in 25 years, not since the night she was told he died in a ball of fire over the Balkan mountains. But when a 22-year-old girl called her private line from a dark parking garage, the general realized the man she had mourned wasn't dead. He was a homeless man on a cardboard box, and he was holding a confession that could burn the Pentagon to the ground. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It wasn't the silence of an empty room. It was the silence of a predator deciding whether to strike or listen. In the shadows of the underground garage, the red laser dot remained fixed on Dr. Thorne's temple, as steady as a heartbeat. "You have 10 seconds to tell me why you have this phone number." General Ashford's voice finally came through. It was cold, precise, and carried the weight of 4 stars and 1,000 secrets. Aaliyah gripped the phone, her knuckles white. She looked at Jack. His eyes were half closed, his breath rattling in the small space of the van. "I have it because Jack Sterling gave it to me. He's dying, General, and your men, Miller and a colonel who doesn't seem to care about civilian casualties, are currently aiming a sniper rifle at my friend's head." "Jack is dead," Ashford snapped, though Aaliyah heard the microscopic tremor in her voice. Colonel Sterling died in 1998. Extraction mission Nightbird. He was MIA, presumed KIA. Then you're about to kill a ghost for the second time, Aaliyah countered, her voice dropping into a low, dangerous register. I have his notebook. I have the logs of the 1998 extraction. I know about the fallen tower coordinates. And I know that if I don't hit send on a pre-timed email to the New York Times in the next 5 minutes, the world is going to find out that you didn't leave him behind by accident. You left him behind to cover your own tracks. Across the garage, the colonel in the dress blues held up a hand. The red laser dot vanished. He pressed a hand to his earpiece, listening intently. Put him on, Ashford commanded. Aaliyah moved the phone to Jack's ear. She leaned in, whispering, Jack, she's here. Victoria is here. Jack's eyes flickered open. The haze of pain seemed to lift for a single, lucent moment. He took a ragged breath, his voice a mere thread of sound. Vicky, he wheezed. The birds. They never came back for the second lift. You told them. The zone was hot, but it wasn't. You just wanted the senator out, and the evidence stayed with me. Aaliyah pulled the phone back. Did you hear him? On the other end of the line, a chair scraped against a floor. General Victoria Ashford, the most powerful woman in the American military, let out a shaky, jagged breath. Colonel Henderson, she said, her voice broadcasting through the van's speakers. Stand down, now. The colonel in the garage stiffened. Ma'am, we have the asset in sight. We can contain this. I said stand down, Ashford roared. Retreat to the perimeter. If so much as a hair on that girl's head is touched, I will have you stripped of your rank before the sun comes up. Secure the area from the local police, but do not, I repeat, do not, approach the vehicle. The colonel lowered his megaphone. He looked at the van with a look of pure, unadulterated loathing. He signaled to his men, and the black SUVs backed away into the shadows of the construction site, though Aaliyah knew they hadn't gone far. Aaliyah, Ashford's voice was different now. It was no longer the general. It was a woman who had just seen a ghost. Listen to me very carefully. You are in over your head. Jack is a hero, but he is also a liability that has been rotting for 2 decades. If you want him to live through the night, you will follow my instructions. There is a private medical transport on its way, not Miller's crew. Mine. Why should I trust you? Aaliyah asked. You're the one who left him there. I was a major then, Ashford whispered, the sound of a 25-year-old weight finally crushing her. I followed orders I thought were right. I've spent every day since then rising through the ranks so that I would never have to follow an order like that again. I thought he was dead, Aaliyah. I swear to God. I thought he was dead. Aaliyah looked at Jack. He had fallen back into a deep, unconscious sleep. The portable oxygen tank was whistling. It was almost empty. He needs a hospital, General. A real one, not a black site. He's going to Walter Reed, Ashford promised. Under my personal authorization. And you're going with him. Bring the notebook. Bring the letter. If you want to save his life, you have to help me fix what I broke 25 years ago. Dr. Thorne looked at Aaliyah, his eyes wide. She's playing us. She's bringing us into her territory. We don't have a choice, Professor, Aaliyah said, looking at the oxygen gauge. He's got 5 minutes of air left. 5 minutes later, a white ambulance with no markings pulled into the garage. 2 medics in civilian clothes jumped out. They didn't move like soldiers, they moved like healers. They didn't look at Aaliyah with suspicion. They looked at Jack with a strange, quiet reverence. Colonel Sterling, one of the medics whispered as they transferred him to a high-tech stretcher. Welcome back, sir. As they loaded Jack into the ambulance, Aaliyah felt the weight of the leather notebook in her hand. She knew she was stepping into the belly of the beast. She was a nursing student from North Philly, and she was about to enter the inner sanctum of the Pentagon. She climbed into the back of the ambulance, sitting next to the man the world had tried to erase. She took his hand. It was cold, but the pulse was there, thrumming like a distant drum. "We're going to the light, Jack," she whispered. As the ambulance sped through the rainy streets of Philadelphia, flanked by a motorcade of silent black cars, Aaliyah opened the letter Jack had given her. She knew she shouldn't, but she needed to know the stakes. She pulled out the single sheet of paper. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a list of names. It was a hand-drawn map of a small farmhouse in Virginia, and a single sentence written in Jack's elegant, shaky hand. "Victoria, I kept the watch. The mission is finally over. Let the girl tell the story." Aaliyah realized then that Jack hadn't been hiding from the government. He had been waiting for her. He had been waiting for someone whose heart wasn't hardened by politics or war. He had been waiting for a girl who saw a man instead of a ghost. And the story she was about to tell would change the history of the United States military forever. The gates of Walter Reed National Military Medical Center don't open for civilians at 3:00 a.m. unless that civilian is carrying the secrets of a 4-star general. Aaliyah Cooper stepped out of the ambulance and into a world of polished marble and silenced weapons. She was a girl from the streets of Philly, but as she looked into the eyes of the most powerful woman in the Pentagon, she realized she wasn't the one who should be afraid. The general was. The motorcade bypassed the main entrance of Walter Reed, veering toward a secluded wing known only as Ward 0. This wasn't a place for routine checkups. This was where the government brought the people who didn't exist. Aaliyah stepped out into the cold night air. The rain had slowed to a miserable drizzle. Around her, men in tactical gear moved with silent, lethal efficiency, but their weapons were lowered. At the center of the tarmac stood a woman who looked like she was carved out of granite, General Victoria Ashford. She was in full dress blues, her chest a mosaic of ribbons and medals. Her hair was pulled back into a bun so tight it looked painful. She stood perfectly still as the medics rushed Jack's gurney past her. For a split second, as the light of the hallway hit Jack's pale, weathered face, the general's mask slipped. Her hand twitched, reaching out as if to touch him, before she caught herself and snapped back into a rigid salute. "Miss Cooper," Ashford said, her voice echoing in the sterile loading bay. "You've had a very long night." "It's been a long 25 years for Jack," Aaliyah replied, refusing to be intimidated. She clutched the leather notebook to her chest. "Follow me," the general commanded. They walked through corridors that felt like a labyrinth. Every 10 feet, a security sensor chimed, acknowledging the general's clearance. They reached a private observation room overlooking a high-tech ICU suite. Below them, through the reinforced glass, Aaliyah saw a team of the nation's best doctors swarming around Jack. They weren't treating a homeless man, they were stabilizing a legend. "He has stage 4 lung cancer, Aaliyah," Ashford said, staring through the glass. "The street life, the Balkan winters, they took their toll. He wasn't just hiding, he was waiting to die." "He was waiting for someone to listen," Aaliyah corrected. She stepped up to the glass. "He told me about the Nightbirds. He told me about the extraction. Why was he left behind, General? Why did a hero spend 2 decades sleeping on a cardboard box while you wore those stars?" Ashford turned, and for the first time, Aaliyah saw the humanity behind the brass. The general's eyes were bloodshot, shimmering with a grief that had been suppressed for a quarter-century. "In 1998, we were extracting a high-level defector from a crumbling war zone. Jack was the lead pilot. The LZ went hot, hotter than the intel suggested. We had 2 birds. One was full of the assets the politicians wanted. The second bird, Jack's bird, was supposed to pick up the remaining security team." The general paused, her voice cracking. The order came from the top. They told me the second bird had been hit by an RPG. They told me there were no survivors. I was the one who signed the KIA papers. I was the one who told his family he was gone. I didn't know he had survived the crash. I didn't know he spent 3 years in a foreign prison before making his way back to U.S. soil on his own. And when he got back, Aaliyah whispered. When he got back, Ashford continued, he saw the statues we'd built for the heroes of that mission. He saw the promotions. He realized that if he came forward, he'd reveal that the military had abandoned its own to save a few senators. He didn't want to destroy the institution he loved, so he became a ghost. He protected us by disappearing. Aaliyah felt a wave of nausea. He protected you, and you let him starve. I didn't know. Ashford raised her voice, then immediately lowered it, glancing at the doctors below. I found out 3 years ago. I've been searching for him ever since, not to silence him, Aaliyah, but to bring him home. Then, why did Agent Miller try to take him by force? Miller doesn't work for me, Ashford said grimly. He works for the people who issued that order in '98, people who are still in power. People who knew Jack was alive and wanted to make sure his records stayed buried. Ashford stepped closer, her shadow looming over Aaliyah. The notebook you're holding, it contains the flight logs. It's the only evidence that the RPG hit was a lie. It's the only thing that can take down the men who turned Jack into a ghost. Aaliyah looked down at the weathered leather. She realized now that she wasn't just holding a diary. She was holding a detonator. He wants you to have it, Aaliyah said, remembering the letter. But not to hide it. He said, let the girl tell the story. A red light began to flash in the ICU below. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor turned into a long, flat, terrifying drone. Code Blue, a doctor shouted. Crash cart now. General Ashford pressed her forehead against the glass, her breath fogging the surface. No, she whispered. Not now, not like this. Aaliyah watched as the doctors began chest compressions on the frail man. Jack's body jolted with every shock of the paddles. She felt a tear slide down her cheek. She thought of the peanut butter sandwiches, the 6:15 a.m. sunrises, and the way he always made sure she felt safe before he'd eat a single bite. He's tired, General, Aaliyah said softly. He's been fighting a war that ended 25 years ago. The flatline continued. 10 seconds. 20. The head doctor looked up at the observation window, shaking his head. He began to reach for the clock to call the time of death. But then Jack's hand, the one with the surgical scar, twitched. The monitor chirped. A weak, erratic pulse flickered across the screen. He's back, Ashford breathed, her hand trembling as she wiped her eyes. The general turned to Aaliyah, her expression hardening into the Iron Lady once more. The men who did this are coming for us. They'll be here by sunrise. They'll have warrants, they'll have the press, and they'll have the law on their side. She reached out her hand. But they don't have that notebook, and they don't have a witness like you. Aaliyah Cooper, are you ready to stop being a nursing student and start being a revolutionary? Aaliyah looked at the notebook, then at the man fighting for his life below. She took the general's hand. I've been working 2 jobs and going to school on 4 hours of sleep for 3 years, General. I was born ready for a fight. The sun rose over Washington, D.C., but for the men behind the 1998 cover-up, it was the beginning of an eternal night. Aaliyah Cooper didn't walk into the Pentagon's briefing room with a lawyer. She walked in with a tattered leather notebook and a general who had nothing left to lose. They thought they could buy her silence with a check. They didn't realize that for a girl who has survived on nothing, the truth is the only currency that matters. The morning light hit the marble floors of the Pentagon with a cold, unforgiving glare. Aaliyah felt small in her worn nursing scrubs, her sneakers squeaking against the polished stone as she walked between General Ashford and Dr. Thorne. She was flanked by 2 military police officers, their faces obscured by the shadows of their helmets. They weren't heading to a hospital room. They were heading to the tank, the high-security conference room where the Joint Chiefs of Staff made decisions that reshaped the map of the world. As the heavy reinforced doors hissed open, Aaliyah saw them. 4 men in expensive suits, sitting around a mahogany table. At the head of the table was Secretary Silas Vane, a man whose political career had been built on the success of the 1998 Balkan missions. Next to him sat Agent Miller, looking agitated, his eyes fixed on the bag clutched in Aaliyah's hand. "General Ashford," Vane said, his voice smooth as silk and twice as slippery. "You've caused quite a stir, bringing a civilian into a classified briefing. We could have you court-martialed for less." "Then add it to the list, Silas," Ashford replied, pulling out a chair for Aaliyah. "But before you do, you might want to explain why you've spent the last 48 hours trying to assassinate a Medal of Honor candidate and the woman who saved his life." Vane chuckled, a dry, hollow sound. "Assassinate? We were merely trying to recover sensitive government property from a confused veteran. Jack Sterling died in '98. This man is an imposter using a dead hero's name to extort the VA." Aaliyah felt the heat rise in her chest. She didn't wait for permission to speak. She leaned forward, the leather notebook hitting the table with a heavy thud. "I fed that imposter for 6 months, Aaliyah said, her voice a low, steady rumble that commanded the room's attention. "I saw the scars on his back from a prison camp you said didn't exist. I heard the coordinates of the crash site you claimed was scrubbed by an RPG. This isn't government property. This is a receipt for a life you tried to cancel." Miller moved to grab the notebook, but Dr. Thorne stepped in his way, his presence a physical wall of veteran defiance. "Don't," Thorne warned. "Unless you want the footage of the hospital extraction to go live on every social media platform in the world. We've already uploaded the files to an encrypted cloud. If Aaliyah doesn't enter a code every 2 hours, the Nightbird logs are released to the public." The color drained from Vane's face. He looked at the notebook as if it were a live grenade. "What do you want, Miss Cooper? Money, a full scholarship. We can make your life very comfortable." Aaliyah looked him straight in the eye. "I want Jack Sterling's name restored. I want his medical bills paid, not as a courtesy, but as a debt. And I want the men who left him in that mountain range to stand in front of a mirror and admit they aren't heroes. They're cowards." "That's not how the world works," Vane hissed. "It is today," Ashford interrupted. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a digital recorder. She pressed play. Jack's voice, recorded only hours ago in the ICU, filled the room. It was weak, but the detail was undeniable. He spoke of the gold flight, the secret extraction of a foreign treasury that was prioritized over the lives of the security team. He spoke of the order he heard over his headset, given by Silas Vane himself. "Leave the second bird. We have the assets. Minimize the footprint." The silence in the room was suffocating. Miller looked at the floor. Vane looked like a man watching his empire crumble in real time. "The assets weren't people, were they, Silas?" Ashford said, her voice dripping with contempt. "It was gold. You traded Jack Sterling for a trunk full of bullion to fund your first campaign." "You can't prove that," Vane whispered. "The notebook can," Aaliyah said, opening it to the middle. "Jack didn't just write coordinates. He kept the serial numbers of the crates. He saw what you were loading onto the first plane while he was being told to wait for a pickup that was never coming." Aaliyah stood up. She felt a strange sense of peace. For months, she had felt like a victim of a system that didn't see her. Now, she realized she was the only one in the room who truly saw the truth. "You think Jack is a ghost because he's homeless," she said, her voice echoing off the soundproof walls. "But he's a ghost because you're afraid of the light he carries. Well, the lights are on now." Just then, General Ashford's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and her expression softened. "The surgery is over. He's awake, and he's asking for his breakfast." Aaliyah felt the tears finally break. She didn't care about the general's stars or the secretary's threats. She cared about the man who taught her that small things aren't small. As they walked out of the briefing room, leaving the most powerful men in D.C. to face their own shadows, Aaliyah turned to Miller. "By the way," she said, a sharp, witty edge to her tone, "the sandwich he likes is peanut butter on white bread. Cheap, honest, and more than you'll ever deserve." They headed back to Walter Reed, the motorcade now a victory lap. But as they pulled into the hospital, Aaliyah saw something that stopped her heart. The front of the hospital was swarmed, not by soldiers but by people, hundreds of them. Veterans in old jackets, students, nurses, and ordinary citizens holding signs that read, "I see you, Jack." The story had leaked, but not from Aaliyah. Jack had made one more call before his surgery. He hadn't called the news. He had called the 47th Street bus stop. He had called the people who had lived in the shadows with him, and the forgotten had decided it was time to be heard. Aaliyah looked at the crowd, then at the hospital window where Jack was watching. She realized that the revolution didn't start in the Pentagon. It started with a sandwich and a choice to look someone in the eye. Jack Sterling spent 25 years as a ghost, but he spent his final days as a hero. In the heart of Washington, D.C., the girl who brought him breakfast stood before the world to reveal a secret that would topple a secretary and change the lives of thousands of veterans. Aaliyah Cooper didn't just save a man. She started a movement. Stay until the very end, because what happened to Aaliyah 1 year later is a miracle you have to see to believe. The halls of Walter Reed were no longer silent. They were filled with the sound of a man reclaiming his soul. Jack Sterling sat up in his bed, the light of the Virginia morning washing over him. He wasn't wearing rags anymore. He was wearing a clean hospital gown, and for the first time in 2 decades, his hair had been trimmed and his face was shaved. He looked like the colonel he had once been, sharp, dignified, and unbroken. Aaliyah sat by his side, peeling an orange. She didn't need to bring him peanut butter sandwiches anymore. The hospital provided gourmet meals, but she still brought him a thermos of black coffee, just the way he liked it. "The news is everywhere, Jack," she whispered. "Sela's vein resigned this morning. The Nightbird logs were authenticated by a forensic team. They found the crates, Jack. They found the gold in a private vault in Switzerland. It's all over." Jack took a slow sip of the coffee, his eyes tracking the dust motes dancing in the sunlight. "It was never about the gold, Aaliyah. It was about the men. They're finally bringing the rest of them home. The security team, the ones we thought were lost. Their families are getting the truth today." He reached out and took Aaliyah's hand. His grip was thin, but his spirit was a roaring fire. "You did this, girl. You stood where the generals wouldn't. You saw a human being when the world saw a shadow." "You gave me the fight, Jack," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. 3 days later, the President of the United States stood in the East Room of the White House. Behind him stood General Victoria Ashford and Aaliyah Cooper. In a wheelchair at the center of the room sat Jack Sterling. The room was packed with cameras and reporters. The president leaned down, pinning the Medal of Honor to Jack's chest. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the clicking of shutters. "Colonel Jack Sterling," the president said, his voice echoing with gravity. "You were forgotten by your government, but you were never forgotten by your country. Your service was classified, but your character is now a matter of public record. For your gallantry, your sacrifice, and your silence, We owe you a debt we can never fully repay." Jack didn't give a long speech. He looked into the lens of the primary camera, looking directly at every veteran watching from a shelter, every person sleeping on a sidewalk, and every girl like Aaliyah trying to make it to class on an empty stomach. "Don't let them tell you that you're invisible," Jack said, his voice resonant and strong. "The most powerful weapon in the world isn't a missile or a jet. It's a person who refuses to look away. Find your Aaliyah, and if you can't find her, be her." 1 year passed. Aaliyah Cooper didn't just finish nursing school, she graduated at the top of her class. But she didn't go to work at a high-end private clinic. Today, she stands in front of a sleek, modern building in the heart of North Philadelphia. Above the glass doors, the silver letters read, "The Sterling Cooper Veterans Center." Inside, it isn't just a clinic, it's a sanctuary. There are beds for the displaced, a legal team to fight the VA for benefits, and a kitchen that serves 3 meals a day. Aaliyah walks through the lobby, her white coat crisp and clean. She stops at the front desk where a young girl, barely 19, is training to be a receptionist. "How's the morning shift?" Aaliyah asks. "Busy, Dr. Cooper," the girl smiles. "There's a line at the breakfast window." Aaliyah walks to the window. Outside, at the very same bus stop where Jack used to sleep, there is no more cardboard. Instead, there is a heated bench and a plaque that tells the story of the ghost who came home. Every morning at 6:15 a.m., a group of volunteers hands out brown paper bags. Inside each bag is a peanut butter sandwich, a banana, and a note that says, "You are seen, you are heard, you are home." Jack Sterling passed away peacefully in his sleep 6 months after receiving his medal. He didn't die alone on a sidewalk. He died in a house in Virginia, overlooking the mountains he once flew over, with General Ashford and Aaliyah by his side. He left his entire military pension and the settlement from the government to fund the center. Aaliyah looks at the bus stop one last time before turning back to her patients. She remembers the 22-year-old girl she used to be, tired, broke, and afraid. She realizes now that the sandwich wasn't just food for Jack, it was a bridge for her. It was the moment she stopped surviving and started living. Somewhere right now, on a street near you, there is a Jack Sterling, a man with a story the world has chosen to ignore, a woman whose name has been erased by the system. They aren't looking for a miracle, they're looking for a witness. What will you do when you see them? Will you cross the street? Or will you build a bridge? If this story touched your heart, if you believe that no veteran should ever be a ghost, then I need you to do 3 things right now. First, hit that like button to let the world know that Jack's story matters. Second, comment the word home below if you believe we should take care of those who protected us. And third, subscribe to this channel. We don't just tell stories here, we give a voice to the voiceless. We are Black Voices Uncut, and we are here to make sure the truth is never buried again. Don't wait for a general to tell you to act. Start today, because as Aaliyah Cooper taught us, small things aren't small. I'm your storyteller. Thank you for watching until the very end. I'll see you in the next one.